So today is Pledge Sunday. So I want to talk about stewardship in a general, broad sense. And I know it will come as a surprise to you all. I have a very different take on stewardship than many have probably heard. Okay? Because I think that stewardship is really about all the different gifts that God gives us. But I believe that a stewardship drive, therefore, should reflect the sort of broadness. What do I mean? Well, because I like to put numbers to things. We had 95 pledge cards last year, so we're shooting for 100 this year. Now, it's not an amount, because the amount isn't what's important. And we're going to talk about that as we go through and we talk about these texts coming up. So we don't have a monetary goal. People say, well, how much are you trying to raise? I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to get 100 cards rather than 95. Even if those cards have zeros on it. I don't care. Why don't I care? Well, let's start off with the scriptures. Bible's always where we should start whenever we ask any big questions. So these two scriptures, I think, are in a great tension for what it feels like whenever you start talking about money in a church, right? Or resources. Because money is just a resource like any other. In fact, economics, I have a minors in economics to fall back on, but economics, the definition of money is merely your time plus your talent that's been made into money, right? You do a certain thing for a certain amount of time, you're paid a certain amount of money for it, whether or not it's an hourly or salary or contractual wage, right? That's just sort of like economics 101 definition. So when we're talking about resources, I think most of us feel very much like Paul. I do the things I know I shouldn't do, but I don't do the things I know I should. I mean, think about it. Our greatest resource isn't money. Our greatest resource is time, right? How many of us know that we should go to bed, but instead of going to bed, we scroll Facebook or TikTok or YouTube or get sucked down some sort of internet adventure into something we didn't really need to know about because we don't really need to know what the poll was on what the best Thanksgiving food was. I mean, as much as interest as that was last night, probably wasn't the best use of my time. By the way, frog-eyed salad scares me. I don't even want to know. But here's the thing. That's what we're talking about here. Our times, our talents, our resources, whatever those be. But that includes our money. We struggle with it. And because we struggle with it, it can become a spiritual struggle and is for many people. We're going to talk about that. You then also have this idea of talents. Okay? Again, don't frame it in money. Frame it in resources. We all have different resources, right? We all have time. We all have talents. We might have money. When we give of those, we give not to go ahead and give back to God whatever God handed us, because after all, our time is from God, right? God gave us life. Our talents are from God. God gave us our talents, our gifts, the things we're good at. And money is just a reflection of those two. So it's from God too. So the question is, what do we give back to God of the things God gave us? How do we steward it? Do we just hoard it and hold on to it in hopes of handing it back to God? Or is there more that can be done? So let's talk about that Romans one for a second. Because I used to be a financial advisor. I sat with many people and had many happy discussions about money and many very difficult discussions. And here's the reality of money. There's only two ways in which people relate to money. Money can either be your master or you can be its. That's really all the different ways people relate to money fall into one of those two pits. Whether or not you love it or you hate it, it can still control you. We've all met people who hate money and yet it controls all their decisions, or people who love money and it controls their decisions. We've all met people who found something else to love and therefore free themselves from it. Behavioral economists. They have this word that they've made up called the hedonistic treadmill. You can feel free to Google me. You can find all sorts of economists that talk about it. Sounds churchy, but it actually has nothing to do with theology. It's this idea that behavioral economists have come up with that says you start off and you buy something. For example, think for a moment. I'm not actually going to ask you this because this is a popular security question, so please don't yell it out. But for a moment, think about the first car you ever was yours. Get that picture in your head. Everyone's got it pictured? Okay. Now I bet you, and again, don't yell it out, that if I asked you the make, model, year, and color of the car, you could probably tell me that. I bet you if I asked you what was your favorite car, like what car are you most emotionally connected to, 75% of people will note that first car. You know why? Because that first car brought you freedom. You could go on dates without mom driving you. Right? It might have allowed you to get your first job. It allowed you to go do things when you're like, I'm hungry now, I want to cook, I'm going to McDonald's. You could do that now. Right? So it gave you all this freedom. And that's what made the car valuable. Not that it was a 10-year-old car that barely ran. That's what made it exciting. That's why your second and your third and your fourth car, even if they're much better cars, will never live up to the legend that is that first car. Because we adapted. Once we got used to it, the second car didn't buy us much more. Even if it was a far better car. The third car was not much better in the sense if it didn't get us freedom, we already had it. What does this mean? This means that a lot of people, if you go out there and you try to make your life about things, about materials, rather than about people and relationship, you will never be done. Because you'll start off in that first job and be like, yes, I'm 20 and I'm doing great. I got my own apartment. I have a 10-year-old car. I got a job. I can go out on Saturday nights. I'm doing great. And then 2 to 3 years later, you're like, man, all my friends can do this. And I'm getting tired of going out all the time. And my friends start buying houses. So what do? You buy a house. And you buy a better car, because when you move into the house, you see that all the people have a better car than yours. You want a car as good as theirs, so you go into debt, and you get that car, you get that house, and you're like, woohoo! And then you go a little longer in your career, and then people start getting bigger houses. So you go ahead, and you're like, that's it, I need a bigger house. So you work longer hours, so you get that promotion, so you buy the giant box house down in Macungie that they're building behind the Weiss. Okay? And then right next to it, you're like, man, my old Subaru's lousy. I need like a Tesla. So you work longer, you work harder, you keep doing this because there's always going to be another level, another promotion, another thing you can go buy until you realize your life has gone by you. And you missed all that time with your kids. You missed all that time with your parents. And you don't get that time back. The most limited resource we have is our time. Now you're in a big box house with a nice Tesla and nothing. There is nothing sadder, scarier, or lonelier than moving around a giant house by yourself. And that happens is because money has become your master, because that's what your life was about. Behavioral economists tell us the way to break that is to give away money. Because you can't give away your master. Because every dollar counts towards that next level up. The problem is there's an infinite number of levels. You'll never make it before you die. If you want to live life, figure out what you're passionate about, what you care about, what will make you happy, and you devote your resources to that. Those things. If it's family, then family. If it's community, then community. If it's God, then God. Because at the end of the day, those are the sorts of things that last and that matter. If you can't give away any money, then you might not be in control. Now, when you get to the thing of the talents, we talked about why the individual should give to charity. And there's a lot of charities that are at church, a lot of charities that aren't, right? So I'm just saying charity. But God comes in and says, listen, everything you have ever done is some combination of you existing, the time you have, and the talents you were given, all of which are gifts from God, right? So yeah, you earned the money with the gifts and the time that God gave you. You are that servant. And the question is, what do you do with it? What do you do with your time? What do you do with your resources? See, in a lot of churches out there, they fall back on guilt and obligation. That is not healthy. And that is not okay. And that is not why you should give. And if that's why you're going to give today, please take a break and don't. Because guilt and obligation have been used too often by the church because what the church has to say is, dude, we've dug a really big hole back here and we're going to hold the gates. We're going to make sure we keep doing the same not working programming ever. And we're going to stick your money in that hole because we know that we got to survive for another year so we don't have to get rid of that old baptismal font. Some of you may have come from churches where that was the reality. That money and resources and time was merely trying to keep the inevitable death from happening a little slower. Survive a little longer for some miraculous thing that might occur. Unfortunately, that's the reality of a lot of churches. So they turn to guilt, they turn to shame, they turn to obligation to try to get people to give. But that's not why you should give. I think in the thing, when the master turns around and says, oh, really, you know this about me, he's making fun of the slave. Why? Because that is not who God is at all. God does not sow where he doesn't reap. God is not harsh. God is not hate-filled. God is love. So then why do you give? Well, for the same reason you give to anything. Because you believe in what they're doing. You believe in the cause. You want to be part of that change, part of that cause, part of the good that is occurring. And that is why I'd want you, if you want to give either time or talent or resources or whatever to Nativity. Not because you feel obliged, not because you're trying to avoid shame, not because you want to be self-righteous. Those are horrible reasons to give. The reason you give is that you look at what we're doing and you say, I want to be part of that. It's also the reason you volunteer. Let me tell you a little bit about Nativity. We are a growing church, unlike most other churches. We are a church that cares particularly about our youth. To give you an example of what I mean, when I say if you give $1, it's not going to sustain some old ministry, it's going to give birth to a new one. 2 weeks ago? Was it 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, we had Starbucks Theology, one of our newest ministries is starting. We invited 7th graders to 12th graders to come, have coffee. They voted on a topic. They wanted to talk about money laundering in the church, God bless them, and financial controls, and the theology behind it. You know how many showed up? 20. 27th to 12th graders showed up for an hour-long presentation of listening to me. That shows that they are faithful people who wanted to learn. That is amazing. That costs time and money and resources from the church to do it, but man, if 20 students show up, that is awesome. And that is a characteristic of who we are as a community because they are a critical part of who we are. We're going to have breakfast with Santa. We've fed countless amounts of people. We've clothed people. We've helped Parkland Cares. God works our hand. We had more activities than the entire synod combined, just about. We grow. Last 2 years, we've had 30 plus new members. We are a thriving, growing congregation that is hoping and reaching to the people not just in these pews and in this place, but across the Lehigh Valley to carry out all the different ways God has called us to make our community better. And so when you think about pledging, when you think about volunteering, when you think about it being part of it, the question you should be thinking to yourself is not one of obligation, not one of shame, not one of self-righteousness, but a simple question. Do you want to be part of this movement? And in what ways? So as I do at the end of every sermon, I always give you something to consider. And it is simply that. How is God calling you to be part of this movement? To make the Lehigh Valley a more compassionate, loving, caring, merciful place? Today and forward. And is he calling you to help with the pledge drive?